you're absolutely right. Under the Obama administration, the situation in the Middle East didn't get any better. I mean, he only expanded Bush-era foreign policy during his administration. He used drone strikes at a higher rate than the Bush administration did. I mean, it's so. I think it is important to like look at what motivates this policy, right? Because it really does go back to material incentives, the material incentives that fuel the military-industrial complex. You mentioned the resources at play here. And, you know, there's been this focus, this real shift toward pretty terrifying rhetoric in regard to China. And I'm wondering if you'd be willing to talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's several think tanks that have emboldened the Cold War against China. And I think it's really, really scary the amount that Trump has escalated, not only the rhetoric, but of course the policy in place. He's adopting literal like Steve Bannon talking points, you know, not only saying that this was a virus from Wuhan and calling it the China virus, which is just super xenophobic and xenophobic, but he's also kind of adopting these talking points from this really dangerous think tank called the Committee on Present Danger China, where you have people like Frank Gaffney and Steve Bannon being a part of it, that essentially are replicating the talking points that got us into the Iraq War, saying that we need inspectors on the ground analyzing this lab to make sure that the virus really didn't come from there. I mean, does that sound familiar to you? It's just, it's so scary when you look past Trump's ridiculous bigotry and you actually see, you know, plays essentially starting, you know, not beyond just a trade war with China, but essentially it could turn into a hot war. And it's really, really scary.
Yeah, you're seeing like a big kind of coming together of, like you said, the Bannon-like extreme right, but also like plenty of prominent liberals, centrists, you know, the list goes on, of just coming together around this new China threat. What do you make of that? But also, like, what should our policy towards China be?
I mean, that's a big one. I'm all for international cooperation. I think that the way Cuba is handling the COVID, you know, global pandemic as opposed to the U.S. really just says it all. This is an alleged U.S. enemy of this country, and they just embody international solidarity, you know, and international medical, you know, help toward the rest of the world. They're sending contingents of doctors everywhere. They're helping people. And the U.S. is increasing sanctions, bombings, trying to install, you know, coups in other countries. It's just unfathomable what the U.S. is doing in light of this global pandemic when the world should be cooperating. You had even China sending PPE to other countries, you know, talking about how they would share a vaccine if they had a medical solution to this. So, you know, as much as we fearmonger about China, I'm under the impression that we should be completely open with what countries are deemed U.S. enemies and actually be sharing stuff instead of fearmongering and warmongering against them. So it's really unfortunate because I do see a lot of liberals and centrists adopting the xenophobia against China and this whole ludicrous notion of banning TikTok when actual, you know, U.S. companies are doing the exact same thing, if not more than TikTok is doing. There was even a Washington Post article that said that, you know, TikTok is not actually accumulating data and selling it to the Chinese government. So it's debunked on so many levels. But if you want to direct your outrage, maybe you should direct it at the U.S. Silicon Valley corporations that are doing what we are told TikTok is doing first.
Absolutely. I mean, I just did a whole segment about how our data gets sold and how much that makes us vulnerable to bad actors online, hackers, stalkers, all of that. But, you know, one thing that I forgot to mention is the fact that Twitter right now is about to be fined because they were caught using the phone numbers that people put in for what is it called? Two-factor authorization. They've been selling that to marketers. So, I mean, the kind of stuff that happens with Silicon Valley businesses in the United States is disgusting. But I think what really motivates the Trump administration when it comes to TikTok and WeChat is that these Chinese, you know, companies do threaten Silicon Valley capitalism, which Nando perfectly mentioned earlier in the show when he said, hey, you know what? They're driving our economy right now. If you look at the stock market.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well said.
It's amazing. And, you know, with China, Mark Esper was working for Raytheon right before he began working for the Trump administration.
Nice.
And he received a deferred compensation package, meaning that he will be paid a giant sum of money in 2022 based on the stock value of Raytheon. So he has a vested interest, literally a vested interest, to ramp up war with China, especially considering some of the private military companies out of China are beginning to grow and are serving as a real competition to U.S. Defense contractors.
Absolutely.
So it's just always goes back to, you know, material interests, and it's terrifying, and always done under the guise of protecting human rights and democracy.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't get more cynical than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I also wanted to kind of piggyback off of Nando's previous question when he mentioned, you know, like, what should the policy toward China be? I'm in agreement with you, but I also have an issue with some people on the left who aren't honest about the actual abuses that take place in China, right? And the abuses that take place in Hong Kong now, Taiwan. I think the Uyghur Muslims and how they're being sent to these camps. I think it's important to be honest about those issues while also accepting that U.S. involvement and ramping up war with China would be a complete and utter disaster.
I think that what's most hilarious about the Uyghur Muslim situation is the fact that you have people even from the Bush administration and Steve Bannon literally talking about Uyghur Muslims, saying this is a reason that we need to be sanctioning China. We need to be ramping up this Cold War with China. Since when do they care about Muslims? It's fascinating to me. The levels of hypocrisy never cease to astound me with the political establishment, especially when it comes to, you know, China and Muslims around the world. I mean, we have a literal prison camp that we're operating in Guantanamo Bay, occupying Cuba still, where we're holding God knows how many people still from 9/11 that were just lumped up, you know, and arrested. And it's just absolutely insane to me that this context is omitted and we just take these statements at face value.